and I have some questions to raise about the chair of the forum. So, on those points, I don't think you'd have to be a socialist to have predicted or expected that there would be a stacked speakers list at this forum. I think any shrewd observer of politics might have expected that. But what is surprising is the breathtaking bias that is there in the speakers list. The audacity of the government to go for a speakers list such as that. I stood up in the Dáil last week and I said that there was a 5-to-1 ratio, approximately, but 5-to-1, between speakers who are pro-NATO, pro-EU militarisation, pro the arms industry on the one hand, and people with a track record of speaking out and opposing those agendas on the other. And I stand by that, right? In fact, the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien, taking leaders' questions, said that he doubted if that would stand up to independent verification. Well, we would say the media should check into that speakers list and give your opinions in relation to it. And I'm glad to see that the point of view that we expressed in the Dáil last week has been backed up by President Michael D. Higgins. It's been backed up by Senator Tom Clonan, who knows a thing or two about these things as well. On the speakers list, Leo Varadkar is addressing the forum. Micheál Martin is addressing the forum. Eamon Ryan is addressing the forum. Where are the opposition leaders that have been asked to address the forum? Very one-sided, very biased, and yet we're told that we're welcome to participate in the debate, a debate that from the platform we've been excluded from. I think it is legitimate to raise points and questions about the role of the chairperson here. The chairperson is responsible not just for chairing the forum, but of writing the official report which will be submitted to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And yes, I'm aware of the stated reasons as to why she received the award Dame of the British Empire, but Louise Richardson writes about politics and has written about politics for a long time. She's written about US foreign policy in Latin America during the Cold War, a very bloody history of interventions, and has offered up explanations for it which border on justification from my point of view. She also was an open supporter of imperialist Western intervention into Afghanistan, and I don't believe that she should be chairing the forum, and I don't believe that she should be writing the report that goes to the Minister. Final point on the forum that I would raise that hasn't received much attention yet, but it's the forum session that's on the issue of essentially it's on the issue of the arms trade and the arms industry and the opportunities that are there for Irish companies essentially to get on the train and join the ride. Is this government policy now to promote the arms trade? I don't think that there should be a discussion about Irish companies getting involved in and profiting from the arms trade. We had a record expenditure on arms last year. We have a booming arms race in the world. That is not something that this country should be part of.
Mick, you're cherry-picking Professor Richardson's involvement in world affairs. She's been a critic of imperialist adventures in Suez and in the Malvinas stroke Falklands, and she's been very heavily involved from a very young age in the Irish anti-apartheid movement. So you launched a personal attack on her reputation, and you haven't learned the lessons of the President's apology.
No, I don't agree with that. So, first of all, I'm not levelling a personal attack.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. I'm making a clear political point about the track record of the woman who's been invited to chair the forum and to give the report to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. It is a matter of fact It is a matter of fact, Senan, that Louise Richardson has offered up explanations for US foreign policy in Latin America during the Cold War, the bloody interventions there which border on justification for what was done there. And it is a matter of fact that she supported Western imperial intervention in Afghanistan. Go away and check what she said in relation to that. That's undeniable, all right? And you could say that's cherry picking. Well, if it is, they're bloody big cherries.
Nick, who would you suggest
we do questions at the end when everyone comes back. Would that be okay with everyone?
Yeah. Look, first of all, we want to commend Michael D. Higgins for ringing the alarm bells about the trajectory of government foreign policy away from neutrality and towards closer alignment with NATO, and his correct suggestions or indications that this consultative forum on security and defence policy is completely stacked in favour of those who want to abandon neutrality and move us closer towards NATO and the project of EU militarisation. This is something that we have been trying to ring the alarm bells about since this consultative forum was first mooted. But to be honest, when you look at the forum, our worst fears about how biased, how unashamedly one-sided this forum is have been realised. And I would strongly invite, and this isn't about personalising anything, I would strongly invite people to read this. We saw this on Thursday. This is the list, the official list and biography of the speakers who will be participating in the forum. Please look at the biographies the government themselves have presented of who's speaking. There are at least 4 that I can count, possibly 6, who either work for NATO or who are closely associated with NATO. There are a whole series of academics who have a long published record of supporting the project of EU militarisation, arguing that we need to move beyond neutrality and supporting the closer alignment with NATO. We have at least 6 generals or very, very serious military personnel, one of whom is on secondment to NATO. So it is absolutely stacked. In contrast, there is one speaker who is a known activist for the peace and neutrality and anti-war movement in this country. One. At the session on engagement with NATO, there are 3 speakers. 2 of them work for NATO, and the other one is an academic who is on record as arguing we need to move closer to NATO. Not a single voice on that panel who is critical of NATO, of Western foreign policy, of the move towards militarisation and away from neutrality. No fair-minded person could say that this forum is anything other than a stacked ready-up designed to condition public opinion away from neutrality and towards closer military alignment with NATO. And for that reason, I mean, we wanted to study the details of the forum, get as much information as we could about the speakers and the makeup of the forum. But for our part, in People Before Profit, as this forum currently stands, we will absolutely not participate in this complete sham. And that is why we've organised people's forums on neutrality around the country with a very, very well attended conference last night in Dublin, of course, which was barely covered by the media at all. I invite people to attend the ones that will be happening over the coming days in Cork, Limerick and Galway. But it is every single opinion poll shows a significant majority in this country are in favour of retaining neutrality and are against involvement in NATO, and yet we have a consultative forum which is stacked absolutely overwhelmingly in favour of moving away from neutrality, closer to NATO and closer to the EU militarisation project. I mean, nothing could be a clearer ready-up designed to drive us into the arms of the military-industrial complex and those who push an agenda of militarism and war. So we would strongly encourage people to start protesting about what the government are doing to shred our precious tradition of neutrality.
Yeah, I want to speak about World Refugee Day, which is today. There's a very important gathering at 5:30 at the Garden of Remembrance, organised by Ireland for All and Massey, the movement of asylum seekers in Ireland. In the last week, we have seen the horrific reality of what Europe's Fortress Europe policy means. It is a murderous policy. It's a policy which is responsible for almost 30,000 deaths in the Mediterranean over the course of the last decade. Most recently, hundreds of people, probably close to 500 people, died on a ship close to Greek waters. And that is those deaths are a direct consequence of Greek policy and European policy to discourage refugees from coming. We don't know all of the details yet. It seems quite likely that not only was this an example of the Greek Coast Guard refusing to help people in distress, which is something that regularly happens as part of discouraging refugees of trying to make their way to Greece, but it may even have been in the course of an attempted so-called pushback, which are illegal, often carried out by the Greek Coast Guard, pushing people away from Greek waters into international waters. It may well have been in that context that the boat capsized, with hundreds of deaths as a consequence. The whole of the European establishment is guilty here. Fine Gael MEPs, which voted against extending search and rescue missions in the Mediterranean, are guilty. The political establishment as a whole have blood on their hands in terms of the deaths of tens of thousands of people in the Mediterranean. Just want to give a quote which I think is like an honest expression of what the policy is of the European establishments. It's from the current health minister in Greece, speaking a few years ago. He said, "Border security cannot exist if there are no casualties, and to be clear, if there are no dead. They have to have it worse here than in their countries. Hell must look like heaven to what they will go through here." That's the deliberate policy of the Greek government, and to be honest, it's just a more brutal expression of what the policy of the European Union is, which wreaks destruction through the world in terms of imperialist intervention, in terms of the impacts of climate change, and then turns the Mediterranean into a graveyard to prevent people who are fleeing those disasters from coming here. So on today, the World Refugee Day, will certainly be raising this in the Dáil. We'll be condemning the Fortress Europe policy, and we'll be calling people to gather at 5:30 at the Garden of Remembrance.
Either three of you, would Solidarity PPP be suggesting anyone, if you don't agree with the chair of the forum, or is there a short list that you guys have? And can I also ask about the National Children's Hospital? Seems to be a possibility of significant overruns and cost implications again, and I think Stephen Donnelly was out today asking that Sinn Féin's David Cullinan reveal his sources, essentially. It seems like an unusual move. Do you have any reaction to that?
As an absolute minimum, if this forum was to have any credibility, there would need to be speakers representing the opposition political parties who have a history of campaigning in favour of neutrality and against NATO involvement, and representatives of all the main campaigning organisations that have a long record of campaigning in favour of neutrality and against militarisation. And there would be at least one of those speakers at every session, if you're talking about anything even remotely approximating balance. We're not even remotely close to that. We would also have speakers, for example, from the non-aligned movement internationally. The biggest international grouping of states on these policy matters is the non-aligned movement that has 120 states involved in it. NATO has 33 members, but this conference is jam-packed with NATO staff and NATO members and people associated with the industrial complex. Not a single representative of the 120 non-aligned states that make up the majority of states in the world. Right? So you would want a very, very radical overhaul of this programme for it to be even remotely approximating a fair and balanced debate. And we want a fair and balanced debate. Let's remember, we have put forward bills, as have other parties in this country, seeking a referendum, the ultimate fair debate. We also argued, or at least were supportive of the idea of a citizens' assembly, which is a representative cross-section of Irish society. But the government rejected all of those things and instead picked a forum that is packed to the rafters with generals, with pro-NATO voices, with people working for NATO, with academics who have a history in favour of militarisation, and other people connected to the military-industrial complex. I mean, you couldn't make it up. So there would want to be a very radical overhaul. I'll comment briefly on the Children's Hospital. I'm not privy to David Cullinan's information, but obviously these are very, very serious allegations that we could be looking at tens of millions in additional bills for a hospital that has run enormously over in terms of the cost of building this hospital. So we need the truth on this matter. So of course Davy Cullinan should put his information into the public domain, but we need the government to be straight and honest with people about is there a major problem with these theatres, and is it going to cost tens of millions more to remediate them, and is it going to delay the completion of the hospital?
You also, Richard, by the way, dismissed the recent assessment that the Irish Defence Forces need to double their spending, both in terms of equipment and in terms of the personnel.
Do you want me to take it, or do you want to?
Yes, directed to you.
I think that the first priority in terms of our defence forces is to pay them properly. We are massively staffed in the army, right? I think we're about 2,000 soldiers less than the required complement for our defence forces. That is because they are paid so badly. So let's start with showing some respect for the soldiers by paying them decently. Let's listen to the women of honour who have suggested there is a widespread culture of abuse, of misogyny in the armed forces, and let's listen to them about what needs to happen. And let's also think, what is the best protection for our troops on peacekeeping missions abroad? I would argue the best protection for our troops abroad is the reputation of this country as a neutral country that is not aligned with any of the major military powers. Whether it's Russia, the United States, Britain, China, any of them. We're seen as a state that was born in a battle against empire and against wars. And I think for us to abandon that reputation would actually endanger the safety of our troops on peacekeeping missions abroad.
Well, we didn't fight with our reputation in 1916. We fight for actual military hardware. And one of the recommendations in the assessment is that a doubling of spending in that area as well, specifically on equipment and upgrading our capability.
Well, you see, that's absolutely not true. The idea that it wasn't a conventional war. The Irish Revolution was not a conventional war. It was a popular revolution that liberated this country, not a conventional war. The idea that this country could fight a conventional war against any of the major military powers, or that that's even a possibility of happening, is just preposterous. It's ridiculous. It's sort of a 1950s McCarthyite scaremongering that is preposterous. So actually, what is valuable about the Irish voice and the Irish tradition of neutrality is that it offers an alternative to the crazy militarism of the major powers, and that voice is needed more than ever on the world stage to argue against what is a very dangerous escalation in military competition between the big powers. And Senan, as a James Joyce fan, you should know that because he was anti-war as well.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.